Well, big week ahead here for the Vancouver Canucks. We turn over the welcome mat to Patrick Johnston of the Podkolzin Post Media. Normally a Tuesday guest for us, but flexible enough to join us here on the Monday. How are you, sir?
Big pressure. Welcome, Matt. Oh, my. Oh, my. Oh, boy. I'm ready.
Front of the bus.
Oh, God.
So, first things first, answer me the Bodog poll question. There's tons of big names available on this trade market. Do you want the Canucks to acquire one? Should they go out and acquire one?
It's funny, you sort of. Yes, I think so. I mean,
Yes, let's
they're
have
this
fun.
far into it. Let's have some fun. I mean, yes, the long-term picture is, not to do this, but here we are. I'm sorry, selfishly, I want to cover some playoff games. That's all.
Well, and this is where I'm
It's
at, too,
not
because I occasionally get people replying to me on Twitter going, but you've advocated for this and that for the longest time. And I go, yeah, and that's still how I would do it. But it is clear that this organization from top to bottom is not going to manage that way. So
let's operate in this world.
Exactly. Yeah. So let's operate in this world.
Yeah.
If you keep promising playoffs, then you better improve the hockey club. Go on out there on the trade market and get someone who helps.
And you've recognized that your lineup wasn't good enough. So, there are only so many ways to turn your lineup over. And if the point is that we think the team isn't good enough and they think the team isn't good enough, well, let's go make a trade.
Okay, and all that's fine and good, and I agree. What's happening in the Pacific Division? Because how many teams win the Cup and then miss the playoffs? So you're going to have to pencil in the Golden Knights for a spot. I don't think the Oilers are going anywhere.
Yeah.
They might just be better. The LA Kings are about to acquire Pierre-Luc Dubois, which will have Kopitar, Dubois, and Deneau down the middle. I don't see that team missing the playoffs, save for catastrophic injury. And Seattle still seems like they're on an upward trajectory as well.
Yeah.
Are we talking about the Canucks just grabbing the second wild card and clinging on for dear life? And that means that Calgary's got no chance, I'm assuming? Walk
and
me
then
through
there's the Central Division, right? The Avalanche, the Stars, the Wild. I don't know, maybe the Jets are falling away. Maybe the Predators.
Probably.
You know what I mean? But, you're still having to battle over those guys. You're still having to, no, don't get me wrong. It is hard.
It's a tough path.
The Blues, right? It's a tough path. But at the end of the day, I guess this is the other thing. If you are going to make the playoffs, you are going to have to take some swings. We can quibble whether they've made the right swings to date. But they need to, they need to improve this team because of exactly the reasons you've just lined up.
And I'm not saying don't try. And I'm not saying don't try. I'm just saying I hope Canuck fans realize that if they pull off a big deal, and good on them if they do, it's not like you dust your hands off and go, here come the playoffs, baby.
Yeah, no, exactly. Yeah. No, anyway. Let's go for it. Let's go for it. Let's do it. Let's see them do it.
What about free agency, Patrick? Do you think they're going to be in on the bigger names? Could you see a Dumba or an Orlov amongst the defensemen? Is JT Compher or anybody who could play third line center? Do you think? I think.
Like I said, I still have this sort of feeling that they're going to try to go for a big swing at the draft in the next few days here. But I don't think that precludes them as well from yet. I don't think they solve all their problems in one swoop. They need a defenseman. They need a center. I do. It's not exactly an amazing free agency class, but, when you hear that they were, I enjoyed the sort of Rick's report. Well, of course they're talking. Yes, you're right. Of course they're talking about it. And I see Rick's now saying that they're kind of done with the idea, the Lucic idea, which is fine.
Yeah.
But Compher, any guys like that, yes. Dumba. I thought there was a chance that Dumba was coming a couple of years ago and maybe trade for Besser, but we now have a different management team from the previous one, so it's gonna be interesting to see how that plays out. But I think they're gonna try to do everything they can to add players, and that means signing players, and that means trading for players, and we'll see how it all shakes out.
Did you believe the trade-up talk from the general manager last week?
That felt like some bluster. You stand back, you think a little bit about, the lack of fear as he identified of drafting Russians. And so you start wondering, I talked a little about this on Rick White, but you start wondering about, okay, do people think Michkov's going to slide? If you start sliding, you can start seeing teams behind thinking about it. But then it's pretty clear that the Capitals are thinking the same way. You hear the noise from them. They're drafting at 8. Certainly, I don't think Michkov gets past them at 8, and it sounds like they're interested in trying to move up as well. So, yeah, it's a little bit trying to build some buzz around yourself. It was, I thought, a smart sort of thing for him to suggest. I don't know if it's actually going to happen. So few teams, especially in the first round, ever actually are able to draft or trade up. If anything, it ever happens, it's actually trading back, and even that doesn't happen very often. So, yeah, I will be pleasantly surprised if they are able to do that. I just don't think it's going to be, it could be, but I'm just skeptical given.
Canucks fans should be hoping that Michkov goes because, realistically, he's not going to get to 11 anyway. So you want him to, you want to make sure that he goes so that he takes the spot of another prospect that they can otherwise use.
Yes, I don't think they're taking him anyways.
No.
At 11.
Probably not.
You tell me, Patrick. What do you think?
If by chance, if by miracle.
I mean, I think they're more inclined towards a defenseman. I think that's the best I can figure. But I've really, I have generally stayed away from trying to speculate on who's out there. I've heard rumblings, Willander and things like that. But I'm generally careful in this area, just because I generally draft preview stuff I leave the coos, and then I just find there's just so much noise, whether intentional or not.
It's so easy to talk yourself into and out of something as well. It's so easy.
Yeah, like I've been doing these draft reviews, and 2019 is up today, and Podkolzin was number 10, and you sit there. Well, what was the reasoning? And I said, well, because he was rated 7 or 8, and he was still on the board. That's why they drafted him. There was all this noise about Soderstrom and all these other guys, and in the end, he was a player that they didn't expect to be there at 10, and he was there at 10, and that's who they wanted. So it shakes out. Like I said, it shakes out. Yeah, I'm sure they're hoping that a guy that they've got in the top 2 or 3, like Michkov or whatever, or Carlson, blah blah blah, is going to slide. But he's not going to slide to 11. So
would you trade Podkolzin this year, this summer? Because he might be useful this week potentially. Are you ready to move on?
I thought about that. Yeah, I thought about that. I certainly think he would be appealing. I think there's still plenty of appeal to him.
For sure.
For the reason why you're hesitant to think about trading him.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I think it really. I think it is dependent. I mean, if it's a case of like you could land another first rounder this year, I think you really have to think long and hard about that. Does he actually have a role on the team?
You think there's a world where you think there's a world where someone gives you a first round pick for Vasily Podkolzin?
I don't think so. But I'm just saying, that's the kind of thing that comes to you. But what is the role for him coming into this season? You've got all these wingers. Somebody's got to go. Does he have the most value compared to the rest of them?
We've seen some late developing European forwards, Hedel, Kako, even Nechas. I wonder if people are a little bit more confident believing that guys like Podkolzin will eventually find their level, and maybe they'd be interested in acquiring him. Now, you know me, I love him. I think he's going to be a player still, but he's also currency right now.
There's a bit of maturing to do. I don't think he's, I think it's just a little bit recognizing, he is a bit of a case of which is not uncommon, a guy kind of who's been able to get this far because he's been best among his peers. And then you get to the NHL and everybody's really good.
Yeah.
Even the guys that aren't as good as you are really good. So I think there's been a little bit of that. I don't think there's any suggestion that he doesn't put the work in. I think it's just a little bit of a focus element that he just needs to, as he's a young guy and he's just now is the time. And we saw the way he performed at the end of the season. I don't know if maybe I figured it out, and did he take his foot off the pedal? And then, obviously the first half of last year was tough. Boudreau didn't really know what to do with him despite the good run at the end of the year. He lost his confidence. He wasn't playing. He fully, he admitted it to me at one point, said, I have no confidence in my game right now. And that's a terrible place to be. And that's why they sent him back to the AHL. But then he came back and he still was kind of a non-factor. So,
all right.
Yeah. He needs to find his way.
If you're not going to predict who they're going to take at number 11 and boo Patrick Johnston. I mean, you came to our Super Bowl party. You played all the parlor games there, for God's sakes.
Yeah, nobody's calling me.
I didn't hand you the Super Bowl prop sheet and you went, oh, no, I couldn't possibly. Do you still think trading down is a possibility. Either for just we like a bunch of guys, and so let's get some draft capital, or let's shed a salary if we can.
I mean, the salary thing is still, I mean, obviously, if they're trying to continue to reset the deck, and I have every reason to think that that's not a project they're done with. The Chicago conversation, I think there was some there, like I said at the time, and I think there was merit to it. Someone told me that they thought there was some merit to it, to the point where Chicago, at least, I mean, I don't know if it's still the case, but a month ago, Chicago certainly, I think, had the belief that they would come away, that they would have a Vancouver first round pick from the next 2 years. But we'll see. I don't know. I don't know I don't know where that's at. I know that there was certainly talk about it. And so we'll see. I think trading back or adding a pick is entirely possible. My feeling is that Chicago would like to add that 11 this year because there's a range of player there that they want, because they have to build that guy and Connor Bedard presumably is in the lineup next year, and that guy that you would get at 11 is not likely in the lineup this season, probably not the season after, but in Bedard's last year in ELC, you could have a young quality defenseman working on your third pair, and that's exactly what you need to be doing to build your team to be a contender, because you want, the most prime time, if you have a player of Bedard's quality, the primo time for building your roster towards being a contender is when he is in his age 21 season, the third year of his ELC, and that's just what you want to do.
Lastly, for me, I saw you reported on the passing of Gino Odjick, and something that we were not aware of. For those who missed the story, Patrick, please do.
Well, one of those ones that you thought about. There was some new studies that had come out with some CTE stuff recently, and I actually had got in touch with Gino's old friend Peter Leach, and sort of had asked him, hey, was there ever a suspicion of this? Is there anything about this? And he got back to me last week, and said, there's some sort of test results have come in. To be clear, the only way to fully confirm CTE is to actually physically examine the brain. As I understand it, that has not happened, but essentially athletes, especially in football and hockey, rugby, any of the contact sports, soccer, I think because
soccer's growing, really growing.
Heading,
yeah.
But especially the three sort of most, lacrosse, the main kind of contact sports, the repeated head blows, concussions, has been found to be a very strong contributor to developing CTE later in life. And repeatedly players who were suspected to have suffered with CTE, once their brains get assessed, have been found to have the telltale signs of it. So there was sort of a clinical likelihood that Gino had it, and then I think they found enough kind of other items in these tests that essentially led them, without having to do. I mean, maybe they will do a final assessment, but essentially, yes, that Gino had CTE, which I don't think surprised many. Peter told me Gino had, long worried about it, talked a lot about understanding Gino. For people who maybe don't realize, like Gino was one of the more voracious readers, I think, in the history of hockey. There's a story years ago, BC Book World, which is was a long time sort of basically book review magazine that you'd find on the ferry.
Yeah, right.
Long ago, did a profile on Gino where Gino was he'd read 100 books a year. This was one of the guys. He knew what was up, and was quite taken with. He was reading everything, but trying to figure out what's going on, what's possibly lay in the future for him. And one of the things Peter told me was that when all the stuff started coming out about Darren Bugard, that really shook Gino, because there was a guy that was of his ilk, the toughest guy in the NHL, who just life was completely shattered. And Gino had no regrets. Peter wants that to be clear. Like, Gino would do it all again. The life he had, the things he saw. He traveled the world, from a very small community in Quebec, and he went a long way. And it was because he was willing to use his fists, and he has no regrets about that. And in a certain level, Peter says maybe it's a blessing. Gino obviously died tragically earlier this year of a heart attack, but maybe it was a blessing that he didn't end up having to deal with the sort of dementia that was likely on the way for him. given this now diagnosis.
Yeah, and as he mentions, so many enforcers that profile player in the NHL of his era.
And
also with CTE.
Not just enforcer. I mean, one of the things too that came up was Bernie Nichols, who was involved quite, a large class act, or not a class action, but a large lawsuit push against the NHL several years ago, and they got a very meager settlement. And I think Gino was sort of felt that Bernie had been a bit ostracized by hockey, and he worried that he didn't want to have that happen. He still valued, the sort of friendships.
Oh, Richard recently too. Yeah, granted, not whatever.
So it exists across the board. Obviously enforcers are more likely, but Henri Richard, great example. A lot of guys that dealt with this kind of stuff later.
Hey,
an extraordinary life lived, not without its difficulties, as we knew with Gino.
Before you go, Flames fire sales coming up. Do the Canucks double back on Tyler Toffoli in any way, shape, or
please,
form?
no, just stop.
Well, what?
Why would you ask that 16 minutes in?
Nonsense. I keep the buzz going. Welcome, Matt.
If it's a center or a defenseman price, sure, but
no. But if you jettison one of your wingers to them and get a guy with 1 year left that gets you salary cap space a year from now, why wouldn't you do that?
I had the same thought. I mean, obviously it's a different management team, and the Toffoli story, of course, there is,
He doesn't. Yeah, things have changed in the locker room.
He could have been a Canuck.
We were
back to it. The owner's willing to spend money again, at least on players.
You had the same thought?
What do you mean? Why wouldn't you? Why is this a weird thought for you?
Because of the cap aspect. You're shuffling stuff around. You're trying to make your team different. I'm totally on board with this, Matt. He's a great player. He's a finisher.
Oh. Matt, you're not adding to the wingers. You would get rid of one at the same time.
Changing the mix.
What's the opposite of great minds think alike? You both thought this?
I don't understand why you wouldn't think this. Why did this not come to you?
Because let's address center and defense before we go ahead and start looking at another middle six winger that we once had here.
Because
let get away.
We're managing for the middle term and the long term as well here. This is a galaxy brain thought here. Sorry you didn't arrive on it. Yeah.
Well, thank you to you and your galaxy brain, Patrick. You and Blake can go get a corner table together and plot world domination now.
Sounds
right?
great. Can't wait.
Thanks for filling in on the Welcome Mat today.
Take care, boys.
Tackle all the hills with ease and don't arrive at work all sweaty. Get around the city on electric transportation that fits your lifestyle and get it at bestbuy.ca.